Sometimes the most revealing moments happen when nobody is expecting a headline at all. It wasn't a press release. It wasn't a dramatic sit-down interview with somber music playing underneath. It was Kelly Ripa, in the middle of an ordinary conversation around her 25th anniversary on morning television, saying something almost in passing, that she doesn't plan on working for the rest of her life. 5 words that, on paper, sound obvious. Almost nobody plans to work forever. But when those words come from Kelly Ripa, on that stage after that many years, they land differently. And the moment fans started clipping it, replaying it, and asking each other what it really meant, something became clear. This wasn't really about a schedule change. It was about an audience realizing, maybe for the first time, that the woman who has opened their mornings for over 2 decades is also a person quietly counting down her own chapters. To understand why that comment hit as hard as it did, you have to understand what Kelly Ripa has actually represented to viewers for 25 years. She was never just a host reading from a card. She was the friend you didn't have to explain your bad mood to, because she was probably having one too. She built her entire on-camera identity around being unguarded, laughing at herself before anyone else could, admitting when she was overwhelmed, letting her own family show up in the stories she told. That kind of openness is rare in daytime television, and it's exactly why, when she says something that sounds even slightly like a goodbye, people don't shrug it off. They lean in. It also helps to remember where this all started, because the arc of Kelly Ripa's career has always been tangled up with the arc of her marriage, and that's part of why audiences can't separate the two. She came up through soap opera television in the 1990s, playing a character with just enough mischief and heart that people wanted to keep watching. On that same set, she met Mark Consuelos, and whatever happened between them off-camera moved fast enough that even they seemed surprised by it. They eloped instead of planning a wedding. They built a life instead of scripting one. And decades later, that same instinct, moving toward what feels true rather than what looks planned, seems to be exactly what's showing up again now, just in a different form. Because here's the thing about long marriages and long careers that outsiders don't always notice. The version of a decision that gets treated like breaking news is usually the last step in something that's been building quietly for years. Kelly Ripa didn't wake up one morning and decide out of nowhere to talk about stepping back. She has spent the last several years being unusually candid. About anxiety, about grief, about the exhaustion of building a public identity around cheerfulness while dealing with very private struggles behind it. Fans who have been paying attention weren't blindsided by her recent comments. They recognized them. It felt less like a plot twist and more like a sentence she'd been writing for a while, finally reaching its period. There's something worth sitting with in that. We tend to talk about celebrities announcing things as if their lives operate on press cycles, but real transitions rarely work that way. They show up in offhand comments during ordinary interviews. They show up in the tone of a joke that used to be funnier. They show up when someone who has spent a career deflecting personal questions suddenly, almost casually, answers one honestly. If you go back and watch how Kelly Ripa talks about the show now compared to 5 years ago, the difference isn't in what she says about the format or the ratings, it's in how she talks about time. She talks about the people who deserve a chance to build their own audience. She talks about legacy less as something she's protecting and more as something she's ready to hand off. And that's really where Mark Consuelos becomes such an important part of this story, beyond just being her co-host. Their dynamic on air has always worked because it doesn't perform intimacy, it just has it. The bickering is real bickering. The inside jokes are actually inside jokes. When Kelly rolls her eyes at something Mark says, viewers aren't watching 2 professionals hit their marks. They're watching 2 people who have been arguing about the same small things for 30 years and have made peace with never fully winning those arguments. That's part of why any hint that Kelly might be thinking about a future outside the studio feels like it involves both of them. Audiences don't just wonder what she'll do next. They wonder what it looks like for a couple who built so much of their partnership in front of cameras to eventually step out from under the lights together. It's worth pausing here to ask why this kind of moment resonates so widely, even with people who've never watched a single full episode of the show. Part of it is simple recognition. Almost everyone knows what it feels like to reach a point in a long commitment. A job, a relationship, a routine, where you start quietly asking whether the thing that used to define you still fits the person you've become. Kelly Ripa saying she doesn't intend to work forever isn't really a celebrity story at that point. It's a very ordinary, very human sentence, spoken by someone extraordinary enough that millions of people happen to be listening. There's also the matter of what daytime television means to the people who've kept it on in the background for decades, through job changes, house moves, new babies, aging parents. Kelly Ripa has been present, in some form, for a huge stretch of ordinary American mornings. That kind of presence creates a strange, one-sided intimacy. Viewers feel like they know her, even though the relationship only runs one direction. So when she talks about eventually stepping away, it doesn't just register as an employee considering retirement. It registers as the quiet ending of something that's been stitched into people's routines for a quarter of a century, whether they ever thought about it in those terms before or not. None of this means Kelly Ripa is walking out the door tomorrow, and it's worth being honest about that instead of stretching a thoughtful comment into a breaking news headline. What she's actually described sounds less like an exit and more like an honest reckoning, the kind anyone reaches after doing something demanding for a very long time. She's talked about wanting new voices to get their chance. She's talked about the show outlasting any one host. Those aren't the words of someone plotting a dramatic farewell. They're the words of someone finally allowing herself to imagine life without a 5 a.m. alarm attached to it. Maybe that's the real reason this moment traveled the way it did. Not because it confirmed anything dramatic, but because it gave people permission to think about their own version of the same question. What does it look like to build something for 25 years and still trust yourself enough to imagine walking away from it on your own terms, rather than waiting until the decision gets made for you? Kelly Ripa didn't answer that question for her audience. She just asked it out loud in front of them the way she's always done with everything else in her life. Perhaps that's ultimately why so many people remain invested in Kelly&Mark. Not simply because they've spent decades in the spotlight together, but because audiences keep catching glimpses of something genuine in how they navigate change, uncertainty, and the ordinary business of growing older while the cameras keep rolling. And maybe that's why a single quiet sentence about not working forever ends up staying with viewers far longer than any scripted goodbye ever could. So here's the real question worth sitting with. If Kelly Ripa did eventually step back from that desk, would mornings feel different to you? And what do you think it actually looks like for her and Mark after everything to choose their own next chapter? Let us know what you think in the comments, and if this kind of honest look at Kelly and Mark's story resonated with you, consider sticking around for more.